Wavelength.
Just because we're doing our lectures online doesn't mean that we need to then retreat and make life, all about being alone.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide.
I think there's not enough knowledge around the severity of the long-term impacts that a concussion can give you, and it's not really educated enough.
You should be having.
The minimum job search requirements is definitely problematic, and it is up to a computer to decide whether you receive your payments each month.
This is Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Happy Monday!
It's bloody cold here in Adelaide.
Dude, I can't. I've busted the thermals out and it feels really embarrassing.
I love that you just wear thermals all the time. I think it should become more of a common thing. I'm like a wheat pack girl. I have to have a wheat pack with me all the time.
You're one of those.
Keep warm. Yeah.
I love that for you though. I'm so embarrassing where I'm like, I get really obnoxious thermals and then I can't help but go, do you know I'm wearing thermals? And then pull my pants down and show everyone.
So if anyone sees Grace pulling down her pants, she's just sewing her thermals, don't worry.
Yeah, if you want to see my thermals, I'll show you.
Well, before we jump in, we do need to acknowledge that we are recording Wavelength on the land of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and pay respect to elders past and present.
We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, and we acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. We also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations.
We are back behind the mic for another Monday night, and the world is a bit crazy at the moment. We want to take some time to talk about the federal budget that was announced last Tuesday, as it can be a little bit complicated to understand.
Oh, tell me about it. There's a lot of stats and numbers going on, and unless you have the time to sit down and really read about it, it can be a little bit. So we're going to talk you through it, and let's start by what it means to hand down the budget. Handing down the budget happens every year, and it means submitting the proposed budget to the Cabinet for the elected officials to vote on.
Yes, and this is also the time where we get to find out what they want to use our tax money for. I personally watch the budget every single year, relentlessly crack open a bottle of wine and I'm sitting and watching it. But I was talking around upstairs, apparently no one else does that. Apparently that's just me. So text in over to at 9797 if you also listen to the budget. But this year there were some definite winners and losers.
Yeah, the losers include sheep farmers, international students, mental health and high income urban earners have all had funding cut or reduced. Cass, tell us who some of the winners are.
I definitely will, Grace. $3.5 million in energy relief. So every household will receive $300 off their energy bill, and small businesses will receive $350 off. Violence Against Women is receiving $925 million to establish a permanent leaving violence program over the next 5 years, and Super will be paid for parental leave, which will add $4,250 to their retirement.
Fee-free TAFE, or 20,000 students over the next 3 years for courses related to the construction sector, and $1.9 billion to fund rent subsidies for welfare recipients over the next 5 years. And this is a big one with $3 billion wipes for student debt.
A massive, insane.
Yeah.
It's going to be a really big thing, hopefully, to kind of help the cost of living. It really feels like this budget really focused on the cost of living and really focused on young people as well.
As it should.
As it absolutely should. Now that we have told you mostly everything that you need to know, maybe we should start the episode, hey Grace?
Well,
if you want to. Tonight I'm talking to the CEO of Carclu about some concerning statistics about artists and SA, and later on Izzy speaks about accessibility of birth control.
Yes, but right after the break we are speaking about Hecs Indexation with Olivia Sevas, Labor member for Newland. Stay locked on Wavelength. You're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. We mentioned before the break about Hecs Indexation. To find out a little bit more, we are talking with Olivia Savas, a Labor member for Newland.
Take it away, Alicia.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Could you break down the Hecs changes and what this means for university students and alumni?
Absolutely. So basically as a party, and I guess as a broader group, we can acknowledge that the spike in CPI last year did impact a number of people for different reasons. But of course the impact on Hecs was particularly significant. Basically, the federal government are capping the indexation rate, and that is the rate in which your Hecs raises, to the lower of two figures, one being the wage price index and one the consumer price index. And I guess that's all very technical, but what that really means is that in the 2023 example, Hecs debt would have grown by about half the amount had it been capped. So last year, CPI was 7.1, where WPI was 3.2. And we don't want Hecs growing quicker than wages are growing. So exactly what the federal government are doing are capping the amount that it grows by the lower of the two. So that's being backdated. So basically, if you do have a Hecs debt of around $30,000, for example, you will receive a credit of around $1,300 for last year, as if the indexation rate had been the lower of the two amounts, so the 3.2 amount. And although I'm a state member and it's not necessarily, work that's being done at the state level, I think this is really, really important.
As a Labor member, what was your initial reaction to the Hecs petition? Do you see this as a significant development?
I absolutely welcome it. Absolutely welcome it. Listening to people and making decisions based on the feedback should be the core business of politicians, but unfortunately, we know that it isn't always. Personally, I have a significant Hecs debt myself, one that I'm still paying off and will be for quite some time. And for me, with my balance, it's about, I think it's $2,500 that I'll have credited to my loan. And although I'm very lucky to have a good wage, and I'm not questioning that for a second, I do think it does make it slightly more accessible to talk about changes to Hecs as a politician who has a Hecs debt.
How does the implementation of Hecs step changes regarding indexation impact the accessibility of higher education for students?
So it's a really good question. I think it really does support accessibility, particularly for those who are wanting to access further study or courses with higher repayments. So people with larger debts, I believe mine, for example, almost did hit the $100,000 mark, which is, of course, the Hecs cap. But people with those larger debts will benefit significantly, as a higher indexation rate, such as the 7.1 last year, could potentially lengthen those repayment times. And I think that's something that's a bit of a societal issue, is that Hecs is one of those things while you're studying that is often seen as a one-day problem. But I think that as students go into the workforce during a cost of living crisis, they're starting to realise it's a today problem, and one that you actually can feel impacting your hip pocket. At the same time, we also know that individuals are having multiple careers in their lifetime. Most of my friends are in their late 20s or early 30s, and a number are considering going back to uni. But once they've perhaps felt that pressure, in addition to running a household, paying rent, paying a mortgage, it can be hard, of course, to justify paying more Hecs, particularly as you are watching your balance slowly whittle away and you might see an end in sight. But I think this measure will make studying more accessible in the long term, particularly for those with larger debts or those wanting to return to university or vet studies.
What would be some key takeaways you would like the audience to understand about the changes being implemented?
I think that these changes are really important, and they're a cost of living measure that, when we talk about cost of living measures, we can see the obvious ones, the tax cuts for every taxpayer, really important, the energy bill relief, really important. But this is a cost of living measure that will benefit students and alumni in the long run. And I think it's a real acknowledgement from the federal government that Hecs does impact the day-to-day spending of young people, and that this federal government does support higher education and vocational study, but also wage growth, and that those two must come hand in hand.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Thank you so much for that, Alicia and Olivia. I think a really good point that was made during that was that a lot of young people especially think of it as a later problem.
Yeah.
And I think that is very intentional, that it's so hard to access and find out how to pay it and all of those things the first time you do, because it's easier to not know what the numbers are, not know every year how much it's growing by, because it means that's more money in other people's pockets. So to hear that we have a small step in the right direction, but also a platform right now to tell everyone, if you haven't figured out yet, it took me a few years before I even signed in for the first time to see my Hecs.
Wow.
So make sure you're having a look, you know what's there. It's scary, but you need to know it's against your name.
Yeah, for sure. And it can really hurt your financial growth in the long term and getting a house and moving forward. And it shouldn't.
No.
It really shouldn't. It's unfortunate that I'm glad that things are being changed. It's unfortunate that it's taken so long. And I personally am for free education.
Yeah.
I think it's super important. I think that finances shouldn't come in between someone bettering themselves. And so I think that it's good that the government is starting to kind of value that more, that education should be valued more than a whatever number.
Right after the break, we talk about artist salary in South Australia. You're on Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. Right now, Cass, you're speaking with Mimi Crow about artist salary in South Australia, aren't you?
I sure am, Chris.
Wavelength. on Fresh 92.7.
What is Clarklu and how does it support young South Australian artists?
So Clarklu is Australia's largest multi-art form cultural institution dedicated to children and young people. And we're a 52-year-old organisation, and our mission is to connect all children and young people to the world of creative possibilities as artists, learners, and audience. And that really reflects the expansive remit of our role. We exist because we believe that children having access to art, culture, and creativity enhances every area of their lives.
Would you assess the state of South Australia's art industry, given the recent revelation that artists are making on average $23,000 annually, and that the key investors are crucial for its survival?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of work to do as an arts sector. I believe that the way that the arts is funded is changing right before our eyes. You know, we have an industry that has relied in the past primarily on government funding. And, the truth of the experiences that artists are having is stark. But we're also part of a wider shift in the complexity of decision-making that's impacting on the lives of artists. You know, we have governments that have to think about climate change and aging populations and infrastructure and global consciousness and commitments. And so I think Clarklu, as an organisation that works with the next generation of artists every year, has an obligation to be at the front of thinking about what the new funding models look like. You know, that report was, 23,000 has been quoted a lot, but, you know, what it actually said is that the gross incomes for professional artists was around 54. And if you compare that to the ABS personal income, which is about 56, it's like, oh, well, okay, you know, of the 54,000 that they're saying artists earn, 23 of that is creative income, 15 is arts-related income, and 16 is non-arts-related income. But they're not equal. And the reason they're not equal is because if you take the ABS personal income, it also has superannuation income on top of it, which is about 25,000, which we know most artists aren't getting. That report also outlined that there's about $17,000 worth of expenses related to artistic practice that most artists bear, which, if you consider that against 23,000, means you're only really earning about 7,000. And I think you kind of have to look at all those statistics and think about what it means. I'm really inspired and kind of motivated by the World Future of Jobs report by the OECD. And they've identified that analytical thinking and creative thinking are the most important skills for workers of the future, and that 44% of future skills are going to be disrupted. So if we look at an organization like Clarklu that thinks about funding, we have the capacity to make changes. Changing a system from the top down is hard, but changing a system from the bottom up is a movement. And we believe that embedding and developing education, training, and skills development and partnership, sometimes with unlikely partners, things like green industries or the space sector or new technologies, might be one of the ways that we can help evolve the broader social understanding of the role of artists in our society. And I think that is changing. The OECD can see a future where creativity is needed in all jobs, where art will be needed in all jobs, where good creative income could be the norm for artists.
How can listeners better support the art industry?
Well, the first is to give and give often. And if you can't give big, and most of us can't, give often. So if you buy a ticket to a show, or you go see a gallery, or you do something at a festival or listen to a band, if you make a small donation every time, those small donations from lots of people have a big impact. The second, if you don't work in the arts, or you don't think the arts are about you, start to think about actually how it could be a vital part of considering the work that you're doing in your everyday life. And what I mean by that is, if you're working for a business that's thinking about the world in 5, 10, 20 years, why not engage creatively with children and young people to help them inform your thinking? You know, one of the things I say regularly at Clarklu is that the future is already here.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Thank you so much for that, Mimi. What an insightful interview. It's a really important topic. I think that we talk a lot about cost of living, but for some industries it is significantly harder, especially from COVID. And she talks about if you can't give a lot, give regularly. I think it's a really important topic to talk about. If you're wanting to have a little date night or something like that, go to a show. Support some artists.
There are so many ways to figure out how to. Like, music is such a massive thing for me.
Yeah.
And with a lot of artists, the first week of sales is so important when it comes to charting and lots of different versions of things. So if you've got a bit of extra cash to throw some independent artists in their first week of releasing something, buying their merch at shows. That almost always, depending on what venue they're at, directly supports them. Your ticket doesn't always do that. That's a lot of the time covering venue costs and other production values. If you can figure out ways in the arts that you particularly enjoy supporting the artist directly, try your hardest to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're sitting out there and you're thinking to yourself, I don't really like art that much, you definitely do. You like some sort of music, or you like ballet, or you like cabaret, or you like art, or you like sip and paints, you like something, and there's definitely a venue to go and enjoy that. And there's so many amazing artists in South Australia. We're so lucky to be in a place that does really value art. So go out and value it.
Go on. We're very spoilt for choice here.
We're going to jump right back into some music. You have Wavelength all the way till 7 p.m. on Fresh 927.
Wavelength.
You're on Wavelength, and it's time again for Wavelength Explains, where we dive into a topic that maybe you've seen a bunch of headlines about, or you don't particularly understand what it's all about.
Oh, is that what it is? I never knew.
You've never listened to an episode?
I've never listened to an episode. This is my first time. This week we are talking about the accessibility for birth control for people around Adelaide.
Take it away, Izzy.
Wavelength Explains on Fresh 92.7.
Birth control pills contain synthetic hormones that stop the release of eggs from the ovaries. They thin the lining of the uterus and thicken cervical mucus, so it makes it difficult for sperm to reach the egg. When it comes to pregnancy prevention, combined oral contraceptive pill effectiveness is over 99% when used perfectly. But with things like human error and missed pills, birth control effectiveness drops to around 91%. While some women use the pill to prevent pregnancy, others may use the pill to manage symptoms of PCOS, endometriosis, or even period pain. The best contraceptive pill for you really just depends on your reasons for taking the pill in the first place and your overall health, your medical history, your lifestyle, preferences, and the potential side effects of the contraceptive pill that you're taking. As the 5th of May, South Australian women can now visit participating pharmacies for an assessment to access a resupply of their oral contraceptive pill without needing to see a doctor for a script. It's one of a number of pharmacy initiatives introduced in the state to ensure South Australian women can receive the care they need when they need it in an affordable and timely manner. It's truly to provide flexibility and address women's reproductive health needs, while also helping to ease pressure on hospital emergency departments and wait times to see GPs. More than 130 pharmacists across SA have already completed the training required, and more than 170 pharmacists are currently undertaking the process. Those aged 17 to 40 will be able to access one pack at a time through their pharmacists, so it's up to a maximum of 12 months supply, while those aged 41 to 50 can access one pack without a new script before being referred to their GP or authorised prescribing professional for a review. And this is all thanks to the SA Community Pharmacy Oral Contraceptive Pill Resupply Services Scheme, and to the same South Australian Parliamentary Committee into Women's Health, and to MP Jane Stinson. To those who have also implemented and set up timely access to UTI treatment from a specially trained pharmacist, and to those genuinely supporting better access to health advice and treatment for all South Australian women.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide, you should be having Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Thanks for that, Izzy. After the break, we fill you in on some heaps good news. Cass, because it's your first episode, get ready. That's a reoccurring one as well.
How is it?
Yeah, it is. So keep it on Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. The news can be a little daunting sometimes, so we've wrapped it up into a little cute bill for you. It's heaps good news time.
Can't get enough of this. What's going on, Emily?
I know there's gonna be
Heaps Good News on Wavelength.
Exciting things are happening for Monarto Safari Park over the next 12 months, where the park will be welcoming some new elephants. 2 Asian elephants, Tang Mo and Pak Boon, will leave Taronga Zoo, Sydney in mid-2025 to call South Australia home. They will be moving over here to join a large social herd in a brand new open range habitat. The elephants will also be joined by 3 others from Perth Zoo and Auckland Zoo, New Zealand. And to share some of SA's history, 2024 marks 100 years of the Stobie Pole in South Australia. The Stobie Pole was patented by the former Adelaide Electric Supply Company. The engineer of the Stobie Pole was James Cyril Stobie, and the Stobie Pole was erected in the city on South Terrace in 1924. Today, there are over 650,000 of the poles currently standing, and each one is producing power from 180,000 square kilometres in the state. But that's not all. A bridge in Mount Barker, unveiled in April, has been made from almost 500 kilograms of soft plastic. It was done so with the partnership of the Mount Barker District Council, Sustainable Infrastructure Systems, and developer Burke Urban. The new bridge is over the Western Flat Creek, where people can now safely cross over to access the King's Baptist Grammar School, the Linear Park, and much more. Also tonight, a winery in Coonawarra has created a quirky way to eat with their wine, where it will be a very crunchy treat. Patrick of Coonawarra will be launching an insect and wine tasting menu, which is going to be a part of the Penola Coonawarra Arts Festival. The insects will be an idea outside of the box, and the winery wants people to have some fun with it and give something different a try. The idea runs on doing something great towards sustainability and completely giving people a new experience.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
And that brings us to the end of the show tonight. Thank you so much for listening.
Wavelength.